Good afternoon, or good morning, I should say. I'm Michael Marzola. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala, Central America, 1973 to 77. I trained in Costa Rica, however, and then I went to Guatemala in December of 74, and I also served for a bit in Honduras after the hurricane that they had in 75, helping with reconstruction work, and then came back to Guatemala and was there until I was about to COS, complete my service in 1976 when the earthquake hit. And ended up staying and helping with reconstruction and relief effort there, and actually was asked to continue on a project with the Institute for Nutrition of Central America in Panama, in Guatemala City, and I was working on a project until I completed that service in 1977. I was working back and forth from Guatemala City to El Salvador. So that was basically my term of service. There's a lot of stories, as you can imagine, after almost 4 years in those countries, mostly Guatemala. One thing that I did do that was kind of out of the ordinary, I'd like to think, is my dog ended up joining me. My dog came from the United States. His name was Mars. He was from Humboldt County in Northern California. He was a Humboldt County Labrador. He weighed about 85 pounds, solid muscle, beautiful dog. And actually, I wasn't going to bring him. I'd found a home for him. But I got an email from my sister that no, she couldn't let him go to this home, that we had to keep him in the family. And actually, it was one of the hardest things I'd done at that time in my life. So she kept him, and when I was in training, one of the fellows I was in training with, and we trained in Costa Rica, had a dog with him. I remember the guy's name was Chuck Blood, and he had his dog with him. I said, how'd you bring your dog? He said, I just brought him. And I said, well, okay. So I immediately made arrangements to have Mars air freighted down on Pan Am to Guatemala. And he spent the entire, except for the first few months of training, time with me in Guatemala, and he was really quite the ambassador. He did learn Spanish, as a matter of fact. I think he gained the respect and first fear and respect of the people. They really, once they got used to him, people hadn't seen a dog so well behaved, and he was very intelligent. And he had a lot of stories to tell too. Many of them I don't know because I didn't see what he was up to. But one story I could tell is whenever we'd go to a village, if I didn't see him immediately, I kind of knew where he was. He would always be sitting next to the little cocina, where a woman would be making tortillas. The little lady, the Maya women would be making tortillas. And they'd be looking at him and giggling and throwing him tortillas. And he always had this habit of hanging out there. And at first I think they were a little afraid of him, but it turned out that in Guatemalan mythology, there are a couple of characters that appear fairly regularly. One is the Cadejo, which is a black dog that dates back to the Spanish conquest. And there's also in Guatemala a blue-eyed guy with a blonde beard that kind of looked like me. It was Don Pedro Alvarado. And they were sort of associated, myself and my dog. I didn't know this for quite a while. I was always wondering why we're getting this kind of interesting, usually very respectful treatment, It just really mystified me. And I finally was told, well, there's a story about the Cadejo and Don Pedro Alvarado, which I honestly didn't have a lot of respect for Don Pedro Alvarado myself, having known the history of the Guatemalan conquest, but nevertheless, it was an interesting position to be in. Another story about Mars. When the earthquake hit in 1973, 76, February of 76, we were asleep in my place, and I lived in a little town called Misco, just on the outskirts of Guatemala City. And I'm used to earthquakes. I'm a Californian, so I kind of knew, and I was always waiting for something to happen in Guatemala, because they did have a long history of earthquakes, right? Obviously, historically, it's right along that chain of volcanoes, etc. And one morning at about 3 a.m., the dog started barking, and I was just I came out of a fairly deep sleep, and I could hear what sounded like a subway train going under the house. I said, damn, it's an earthquake. So I jumped up, grabbed my bedclothes and jumped up over my bed, went outside. We had I had 4 rooms in my house, and I had several people staying there at the time, Peace Corps volunteers and other international visitors. And I had a friend who was a volunteer, Martin Varela, was sleeping at the foot of the bed on the floor in one of those old-fashioned mummy bags that only zipped halfway down. And I leapt over Martin, the dog, and I ran outside to our patio, which is a long, narrow grass patio, and I couldn't stand up. It was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, the whole thing everything was moving. I could hear grass breaking, people screaming, things falling down. And fortunately, the dog got me up, and I guess the house had not been better built, I could have been a casualty. And actually, the house that I would have lived in this one site where I'd originally been stationed was completely flat. It was up in a place called Tecpan, and I did go up there after about a month or so after the earthquake had happened and look for the place that I had been living, and I did live there for a while, and it was like adobe, almost 3 feet deep, dust, powder, unbelievable. It was an unbelievable earthquake. So anyhow, living in Mixco after the earthquake, my dog, which I was always grateful for him to getting me up. And I should have mentioned too, my friend who was in that sleeping bag comes jumping out because he couldn't get out of the damn thing. Complete, his eyes like saucers. You can imagine. And we had another guy that slept through the whole thing. Unbelievable. But anyhow, we're in this town. All the infrastructure pretty much collapsed, and we needed firewood to cook with. And this little kid that used to hang out at my house, a little guy named Hugo, always loved Mars, and they would run around town together when I was off doing my work. And Hugo said, hey, I know where I can get you some wood. Just let me have the machete and I'll take Mars with me and we'll go get some wood. So I said, okay, sure, Hugo, go ahead. I give him the machete and he's off. He disappears with the dog. And about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, he comes back with a little bit of firewood and he's out of breath and sweating and, oh, Don Miguel, you won't believe what happened. Well, what he'd done is he'd gone onto this guy's private property and was cutting firewood. And this old guy who had been like the town's, he was like, almost like the guy with the black hat, kind of the tough guy, the town tough guy that everybody was totally afraid of. Fortunately, he was in his 90s, so he wasn't quite as spry as he had been. But he came after Hugo with a machete, and my dog, Mars, had jumped and knocked the guy down. And then Hugo grabbed the dog and they ran with a little bit of firewood and took off and tore off to my place. But what's interesting is Mars never attacked anybody, ever. This is like, he just knew. He just knew. It was an incredible ambassador, I guess you could say. In fact, the first town we lived in Tecpan, we used to go around town, and I remember friends of Peace Corps people at those days had motorcycles, you may remember, some of them did. And the dogs would come running out and biting on their ankles and stuff when they'd be going through town. Well, one time we went through town with Mars, and the dogs would run out, and then Mars would just take them and just deck them. He wouldn't hurt them, he'd just grab them and deck them. And it totally freaked him out. And after that, the town was peaceful. He was like, Wyatt Earp of the dog world. It completely settled down the dogs in that community, and actually everybody loved him for it. It was another unintended consequence. But anyhow, that's Mars and the Peace Corps.